Let me show you something interesting today. I've been testing a brand new AI tool that recently popped onto my radar, and honestly, it surprised me. The tool is called Gatsby, and it claims it can elevate your research papers using advanced AI built specifically for academic writing. Now, I'll be honest with you right away, this tool might stir up a bit of debate, because unlike most AI tools that just help you brainstorm or summarize papers, Gatsby actually claims it can write a full academic paper from your own data, and that's a pretty big claim. So in this video, we're going to take a real look at it. I'll show you exactly how it works, what I like about it, what I'm not completely convinced by yet, and whether it's actually useful for researchers, students, or academics. Overall, after testing it, I have to say I'm genuinely impressed. It's not perfect. No AI tool is, but there are a few things it does that really caught my attention, and I think they might surprise you too. When you first open Gatsby, the interface is pretty straightforward. But one thing I actually appreciate is that it's designed to run directly on your desktop or laptop instead of relying entirely on a browser. That might not sound like a big deal, but if you've ever used AI tools in a web interface, you know they can crash, freeze, or lose your work at the worst possible moment. Now, technically, there is a web version available, but it's still in beta. And yes, there's even a free demo you can try. Just keep one thing in mind. If you're using the free demo, your data may be stored on their system. So if you're working with sensitive research data, the safer option is to use the full version. That way you get stronger data protections and the option to have your information deleted after processing, which for academic work is actually pretty important. Now let's jump right in. Once you download Gatsby to your computer, the first thing you notice is how simple the interface looks. Everything is clean and easy to understand. On the main screen, you'll see three core options: Innovator, Writer, and Reviewer. Each one focuses on a different part of academic work. The Innovator tool helps you generate fresh research ideas. The Writer builds content based on the data and research you already have. And the Reviewer helps create literature reviews and even meta-analyses. These are exactly the kinds of tasks where AI usually performs very well. And since Gatsby was built specifically for academics, the big question is whether it can actually outperform tools like ChatGPT or Manus AI, which many researchers already rely on today. When you first open the Innovator section inside Gatsby, the experience actually feels pretty simple and friendly. A small message appears that says, "Hi, I'm Gatsby. I can assist you with your technical innovation." At first, that sounds like a normal greeting, but what happens next is where the tool starts to get interesting. When you sign up, the system asks you to enter your research interests. This part is important because Gatsby uses those keywords to understand the field you are working in. For example, in my test, I entered things like OPV devices, nanocomposite electrodes, and transparent electrodes. You can add several topics here, and the more specific you are, the better the system performs. If the keywords are too general, Gatsby sometimes tries to force ideas into areas that do not really match your research, so it helps to keep things focused and clear. Once those interests are saved, you move into the Innovator workspace. On the home screen, Gatsby begins suggesting research ideas that relate to the topics you entered earlier. These suggestions are not random. They are generated based on the exact research themes you provided during setup. When I opened the suggestions list, I saw several proposed topics connected to OPV materials and nanocomposite structures. Some of the titles were quite technical, which is actually a good sign because it shows the system is trying to match the language used in academic research. I clicked on one of the suggestions related to ternary blend nanocomposite systems. When you select a topic like this, Gatsby starts running a deeper analysis. This step takes a little bit of time, which might feel slow at first, but there is a reason for that. The system is not just generating text quickly. It is actually analyzing the topic, identifying the major problems in the field, and then building structured ideas around those problems. After a short wait, Gatsby produced what it calls a primary analysis. In this section, the system explains that it will first analyze the situation, identify the main research challenge, and then explore possible solutions. For a field as broad as OPV nanocomposites, I was curious to see whether the AI could actually understand the technical context. Surprisingly, the analysis looked quite solid. It started by describing the typical use of ternary blend nanocomposites in photovoltaic devices, and then moved into the critical subcomponents involved in that system. What impressed me the most was how the tool broke the topic into different technical layers. There was a section called Component Analysis, where Gatsby listed several materials and structural components commonly used in OPV devices. It mentioned things like non-fullerene acceptors and other relevant materials that researchers in this field often discuss. This is the point where I noticed something I had never seen before in most AI tools. Gatsby actually generated chemical formulas that matched the topic being discussed. For instance, it included properly formatted chemical structures such as CH3 groups and methylammonium components. The formatting looked correct, and it made the output feel much closer to real scientific writing. Seeing those equations gave me a bit more confidence in the system. Many AI writing tools struggle when it comes to technical notation, especially when chemical or physical formulas are involved. Here, Gatsby seemed to handle it much more naturally. It continued by examining functional aspects of OPV devices and how different materials interact within the system. This kind of breakdown is helpful because it shows the reasoning behind each research idea, instead of just throwing random suggestions at you. From there, the tool began presenting possible research directions. These were structured almost like proposal ideas. One example it suggested was asymmetric side chain engineering for ternary components. Another idea involved kinetically controlled Lig and exchange processes. Each suggestion also came with a small recommendation note explaining how practical the idea might be in solving existing research challenges. I actually liked that Gatsby rated its own ideas. In one case, it gave an idea 3 out of 5 stars, which suggested that even the system recognized some concepts were stronger than others. Another useful feature appears at the bottom of each suggestion. Gatsby lists academic references related to the idea. In the example I tested, there were around 9 references included. You can copy all of this information directly, which makes it easy to start organizing your notes or building a literature review. If you want to explore an idea further, you can expand the section and ask Gatsby for more detail. The system will then generate additional explanation or background research connected to that concept. Eventually, Gatsby even begins drafting a small introduction that explains the research idea in a structured way. This part looks very similar to the beginning of a real academic paper. It introduces the topic, explains why the problem matters, and highlights the key concepts involved. What stood out again were the equations and technical expressions included in the text. They looked clean and surprisingly accurate for an AI-generated draft. At this point, you start to see why the tool takes a little longer to generate results. It is not simply writing sentences, it is building a structured research idea, analyzing components, referencing relevant studies, and even formatting scientific notation. And this is just the innovator section. In the next part, we will look at how Gatsby performs when it actually starts writing literature reviews and full academic style sections based on these ideas. That is where things become even more interesting. Can AI really write an entire peer-reviewed research paper? That question alone is enough to make a lot of academics uncomfortable. For years, writing a paper has been seen as one of the most important skills a researcher can develop. It takes months of reading, experimenting, organizing ideas, and slowly shaping those ideas into a story that other scientists can understand. So when a tool claims it can help generate a full academic manuscript, it naturally raises eyebrows. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to see what this system could actually do in a real situation. The feature that caught my attention inside Gatsby is called the Gatsby Writer. According to the description, it can help you produce a full research manuscript or even a patent disclosure from the material you provide. That second option is especially interesting for people working in technical fields like engineering or materials science, where intellectual property matters a lot. In theory, a tool like this could help researchers organize their ideas before submitting a patent application. And who knows, maybe one day those ideas turn into something valuable. Sadly, that has not happened to me yet, but hope is always there. The way the tool works is fairly simple on the surface. You upload your existing research material, and the system analyzes it before generating a structured paper. To test it properly, I decided not to give it a polished document. Instead, I uploaded an old draft I wrote years ago. It was unfinished and messy, exactly the kind of document researchers usually have sitting somewhere on their computer. I wanted to see if the system could understand what I was trying to do and extract the important information from it. One limitation appeared right away. The platform only accepts Word documents, and the file size limit is 5 megabytes. In some fields, that may not be enough for a full paper, especially if figures and data tables are included. But if you have a draft or a collection of notes saved in a document, it still works well as a starting point. Once the file was uploaded, the system did something interesting before writing anything. It created a short summary of the research described in the document. That step is important because it shows how the AI interprets the information you give it. When I read the summary, I was surprised because it matched my research almost perfectly. It understood the materials I was working with and the general goal of the project. That alone already told me the system was doing a decent job of analyzing the document. After that summary step, the interface lets you choose the target length for the manuscript and then generate the paper. I clicked the option to write a full paper manuscript and waited for the result. It was not instant. The system took some time to build the document, which honestly I prefer. When something appears too quickly, it sometimes feels shallow. But when the paper finally appeared, the structure looked surprisingly professional. It started with a title related to the topic of my draft, followed by an abstract that summarized the work. The introduction was even more impressive. It included references and citations just like a real academic paper. Remember, the only thing I had uploaded was one draft document. From that single source, the system created a full research structure with background context and related literature. For many researchers, that first draft stage is actually the hardest part of writing a paper. Getting a blank page to turn into something structured often takes days or even weeks. Seeing an AI generate a full outline like this is both exciting and slightly controversial. Some people will see it as a productivity tool. Others may see it as a threat to traditional academic writing. When I kept scrolling through the generated paper, the level of detail became even more interesting. The text discussed different electrode materials and referenced various types of nanomaterials used in conductive systems. It mentioned carbon nanotubes, hybrid electrodes, and other concepts that are commonly discussed in materials science research. What impressed me was that the system did not stay at a superficial level. It actually tried to explain the fundamentals behind the materials, including how dispersion works and why certain interactions matter for conductivity. It even included equations related to these mechanisms. In some cases, it probably went deeper than necessary for my specific field, but having that level of detail available can still be useful. Researchers often cut information later during editing, but having a rich starting draft is helpful. Another interesting part of the generated manuscript was how it attempted to interpret the figures from my original draft. It tried to describe experimental setups and visualize results. Not every interpretation was correct. For example, one section assumed that the electrodes were deposited on glass substrates when in fact my experiment involved suspending materials in acetone to study structural stability. That was clearly wrong. But at the same time, the system was trying to connect the information it had and build a logical narrative. There were also a few graphs and charts generated automatically. Some of them did not make sense because the system essentially had to guess the underlying data. One chart suggested plotting sheet resistance against weight fraction, which is actually a reasonable idea for this kind of research. The specific numbers it showed were obviously fabricated, but the suggestion itself was useful. Instead of thinking of the AI as a perfect generator of scientific results, it is better to see it as a brainstorming partner. It shows you what kinds of analyses are common in papers similar to yours. That can help you realize what might be missing from your own research story. In another section, the manuscript suggested including optical transmission data and possibly UV visible spectroscopy. That is also a common measurement for transparent conductive materials. Even if the AI was guessing, those guesses were often aligned with real scientific practices. It also suggested mechanical testing, such as repeated bending cycles, which many papers include when evaluating flexible electrodes. Some parts were a bit strange, like a time-lapse stability test in acetone that did not quite match my experiment. But even those moments can be helpful because they remind you to think about stability and durability tests in general. One of the most valuable parts of the generated paper was the reference list. The system produced dozens of references connected to the introduction and background sections. When I checked them, most of them actually existed in real journals. Some links even opened papers from well-known publications like Nanoscale. That was reassuring because it showed the AI was not inventing completely fictional citations. Of course, every reference still needs to be verified by the researcher before using it in a real submission. But having a list of relevant papers automatically generated can save a lot of time during literature review. Overall, the experience showed me something important. Tools like this are not meant to replace the thinking process of a researcher. Instead, they help transform scattered ideas and early drafts into a structured narrative much faster. Writing a scientific paper is really about telling the story of your research clearly and logically. What Gatsby seems to do is help outline that story for you. It builds the abstract, introduction, and background framework so you can focus on refining the real experimental results. For that reason, I see this tool less as a shortcut and more as a starting point. In many ways, it may represent the beginning of a new stage in academic writing where AI assists researchers in organizing knowledge rather than replacing their expertise. If you decide to try Gatsby for your own research, I'd honestly love to hear how well it works in your field. My feeling right now is that the results may vary depending on the topic. Some areas might work really well with it, while others may not be as strong yet. That's just the nature of new AI tools. They can be incredibly helpful, but they're not perfect, and they still need a bit of human judgment. One feature inside Gatsby that I think is worth talking about is called the Reviewer tool. This is the part that focuses on building systematic literature reviews for any research topic you enter. When you open it, the interface is very simple. It basically says it can help you write a systematic literature review and even perform a meta-analysis if you want. All you need to do is enter your research topic and choose a few optional settings. For example, you can select whether you want a meta-analysis included, and you can limit the search to papers published after a certain year. The timeline can go all the way back to the year 2000, but you can also leave those options blank and simply type your research topic. That's exactly what I did during my test. After entering the topic, Gatsby begins generating the review. It does take a little time, so this isn't something that appears instantly, but the nice thing is that you don't really have to do anything while it works. You can step away for a few minutes, grab a coffee, and let the system finish building the structure. In my case, I asked for a literature review on nanocomposite transparent electrode materials. The first step Gatsby takes is generating an outline. Once that outline appears, you can read through it and decide whether the structure makes sense. If you're happy with it, you simply click the option to create the full paper manuscript. After that, the tool expands the outline into a full literature review, and I have to say, the level of detail it produces is actually impressive. The document includes a proper introduction, referenced sections, a methodology explanation, and even a Prisma-style flow diagram showing how the studies were selected. According to the report, the final review included 13 studies that were selected from more than 2,000 papers in the database. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. Personally, I'm not completely satisfied with that number. When I've done literature reviews on similar topics before, I usually found more relevant papers than that. In fact, when I looked closer at the results, there were years where the system reported only one paper for an entire research trend, which I know isn't accurate. So it's clear that the tool doesn't always capture every important study in the field. It doesn't necessarily find the perfect set of papers either. However, even with those limitations, the output is still useful as a starting point. The structure is solid, the sections are organized clearly, and the references are already included. When you scroll to the bottom of the document, you can see that the tool actually gathered 31 references in total, even though it said only 13 were used in the main analysis. That tells me the system is doing a reasonable search, even if it's not yet as thorough as a manual review. For someone beginning a new project, this could save a lot of time when building the first draft of a literature review. Right now, I still think some other AI research tools do literature reviews a bit better, especially when it comes to finding a wider range of studies. But if you already have access to Gatsby, it's definitely worth trying. And honestly, if I were starting research in a completely new area, I would probably run this tool first, just to get a quick overview of the field before digging deeper myself. One thing I really like about this tool is what happens after the manuscript is created. Once the draft is ready, you are not stuck with just a simple AI output. The platform gives you a few extra options that make the paper much more usable. For example, there is a feature that can help humanize the text and reduce the chance that it looks like typical AI writing. You simply apply credits, and the system adjusts the wording to sound more natural. Another thing I appreciate is the flexibility. You can export the paper to formats like Markdown, LaTeX, or MS Word. That means you can easily continue editing or formatting it anywhere you prefer. It really does feel like exciting times right now. Tools like Gatsby are pushing AI into places we have never seen before, especially when it comes to helping people write full research papers. And yes, this will probably be one of the most debated areas of AI in the academic world. Some people will love it, some people will question it, but one thing is clear. These tools are changing how research work gets done. So keep an eye on this space because it is moving fast and there is a lot more coming. If you found this video helpful, I think you will really enjoy the next one. In that video, I show you how Elicit has become much more powerful and can now help you create literature reviews much faster than before. It is another tool that can seriously change the way you read and organize research papers. Click on the video on your screen and go watch it now.